Becoming the mentally toughest version of yourself isn't about grinding until you collapse, chugging caffeine until your hands shake, or screaming affirmations in the mirror like a maniac. That's the illusion modern culture sold you. That toughness is just more effort, more noise, more brute force. But the truth, real toughness has nothing to do with trying harder. It's about following a system, a hidden blueprint that the samurai, monks, and warriors of Japan discovered centuries ago, one that turned fragile, ordinary humans into men who could face death without a flicker of fear. Think about that for a second. We live in a world where people spiral into panic when their phone battery hits 5%, where running out of Wi-Fi feels like the end of civilization. And yet, 500 years ago, there were people so mentally unshakable that they would bow calmly before battle, fully aware they might not live another hour. They weren't born that way. They were trained, forged, broken, and rebuilt through a method that most people today would never dare to attempt. Within the Eastern philosophy, there is always something shocking. The Japanese had a 4-stage process for building a mind that cannot be broken. They didn't stumble into courage. They engineered it. It wasn't about believing in yourself or pumping up with motivational slogans. It was about systematically stripping away weakness until nothing fragile remained. By the end of this video, you'll understand that same process. You'll know how to build unshakable discipline and mental strength in a world designed to make you soft. Let's call it Shuyō, the path of mental forging. And it starts with a truth that most people today refuse to face. The biggest enemy of strength isn't pain, it's comfort. But that's just the beginning. Because what comes after will challenge everything you thought you knew about toughness. Stage 1. Shuyō, rigorous training. The Japanese word Shuyō translates loosely as training, but calling it that is almost an insult. Training is what you do when you want to get better at a sport. Shuyō is what you do when you want to become unbreakable. It's not practice. It's not exercise. It's a full-scale war against your weaker self. It means total immersion in difficulty, until the line between pain and growth disappears. In ancient Japan, monks would sit under waterfalls in the dead of winter. Imagine icy torrents crashing over your body, needles of freezing water stabbing into your skin, your teeth rattling as your body begs you to move. The cold is unbearable, your muscles spasm violently, your breath is ripped from your chest. And yet, these monks didn't flinch. They didn't cry out. They sat motionless. Their secret: they weren't fighting the cold. They had trained their minds to accept it. One Zen proverb explains it perfectly. The obstacle is not the barrier. The obstacle is the path. To a monk under that waterfall, the suffering wasn't something to survive. It was the teacher. The pain was the path to peace. By refusing to run, by refusing to escape, they stopped treating difficulty as an enemy. And when your mind no longer sees hardship as an attack, it loses its power to break you. Now contrast that with modern life. The moment we feel uncomfortable, we reach for an escape. Too hot, air conditioning. Too cold, central heating. Hungry, food arrives at our door in 20 minutes. Bored, infinite scrolling. Lonely, fake intimacy at the swipe of a finger. Every discomfort engineered out of existence. And yet, instead of making us stronger, it has made us fragile. Our tolerance for difficulty shrinks until the smallest setbacks feel unbearable. We panic when the Wi-Fi cuts out. We rage when traffic delays us by 10 minutes. We collapse under pressures that samurai children would have laughed at. The samurai knew this danger. Yamamoto Tsunetomo in Hagakure wrote, "The way of the samurai is found in death." At first, this sounds like madness. Who in their right mind embraces death? But Tsunetomo wasn't glorifying bloodshed. He was pointing at something deeper. Death meant the death of the weak self, the part of you that clings to comfort, the part that chooses easy roads and quits at the first sign of resistance. Shuyō meant killing that self, again and again, until only strength remained. That's why when samurai trained, they didn't stop when tired. They stopped when transformed. They didn't ask, "Have I done enough?" They asked, "Has this broken me yet? Has this reshaped me?" Only when the answer was yes, did the day's training end. Take Miyamoto Musashi, the most feared swordsman in Japanese history. 60 duels, never defeated. Most imagine him swinging his blade endlessly, in preparation for combat. But Musashi's most obsessive practice wasn't always the sword. It was calligraphy. Brush, ink, paper. Why would a man who killed dozens perfect brushstrokes? Because a single slip ruins the work. One tremor of the hand destroys hours of preparation. Discipline of the brush was discipline of the mind. Musashi understood something profound. If you cannot control your mind in the silence of art, you will not control it in the chaos of battle. By mastering the brush, he mastered himself. And when his blade moved, it was simply an extension of that same mastery. This is Shuyō, using difficulty to forge steel inside your mind. But here's the part nobody wants to hear. Your version of Shuyō is already waiting for you. It's hiding inside the very things you avoid. Difficult conversations, physical discomfort, silence with your own thoughts. Whatever makes you squirm is the exact forge you need. You don't need to copy the monks or the samurai. You need to face the challenges you've been running from. Start small, but be relentless. Choose one form of Shuyō and commit to it daily for 100 days. No negotiation, no excuses, no "I'll start tomorrow." If confrontation terrifies you, have one hard conversation every day. If physical discomfort crushes you, take cold showers until your body stops begging for escape. If you can't focus, sit in silence for 20 minutes while your thoughts claw at you. Do this long enough, and something remarkable happens. The part of you that once screamed, "I can't," goes silent. Your mind adapts. Hard things become normal. But let's be brutally honest. Most of you won't even try. You'll nod along. Maybe even write this down. Promise yourself you'll start Monday. Then life gets busy. You get tired, and you'll reach for comfort again. That's the difference between dreamers and warriors. Shuyō isn't for everyone. It's for people who are sick of being weak, sick of negotiating with themselves, sick of being broken by things that shouldn't break them. And yet, there's a trap. Endless suffering isn't the goal. If you just pile pain onto yourself without purpose, you'll burn out. The monks didn't sit under waterfalls for fun. The samurai didn't practice for hours just to prove they could suffer. They did it within a system, a path that gave their training meaning. Shuyō is only the first step. Without the next, it becomes pointless. Masochism. And the Japanese knew this better than anyone. That's why they developed the second stage, a way to transform blind discipline into a way of life. They called it Budō, the martial way, and it reveals the secret to turning every single moment of existence into training. Stage 2, Budō, the martial way. If Shuyō is the fire that hardens steel, Budō is the mold that gives that steel shape. Shuyō alone makes you tough, but without Budō you're just a blunt weapon. Hard, but directionless. Strong, but aimless. Budō, literally, the martial way, was the code that transformed raw discipline into a complete philosophy of life. And here's the shocking part. Budō wasn't really about fighting. It was about character. Gichin Funakoshi, the founder of modern karate, made this brutally clear. The ultimate aim of martial arts is not victory, but perfection of character. Read that again slowly. Not victory, not trophies, not domination, character. This is the truth most people today miss. Winning a fight proves strength in a moment. Building character makes you undefeatable in every moment. The samurai understood that training didn't stop once the sword was sheathed. The dojo was only the beginning. Every second of their lives was practice. Waking up became a ritual. Eating breakfast became a ritual. Entering a room was done with deliberate awareness. Not because they were obsessed with silly rules, but because they knew something modern people forget. How you do anything is how you do everything. If you are sloppy in small things, you will be sloppy when it matters. If you lose control in trivial situations, you will lose yourself in chaos. Yamamoto Tsunetomo wrote, "Matters of great concern should be treated lightly. Matters of small concern should be treated seriously." At first, this seems backwards. Why take small things so seriously? But here's the genius. If you can maintain discipline when nothing is at stake, then when everything is at stake, discipline is automatic. If you can keep your calm in traffic, then in crisis you won't crumble. If you can control your anger with a coworker, you can control it when your entire reputation is on the line. Budō meant practicing mastery in thousands of small invisible moments, so that when death itself stared you in the face, nothing changed. Now look at your own life. We treat minor inconveniences like disasters. The barista gets your order wrong, and suddenly your entire morning is ruined. A car cuts you off, and you spend an hour rehearsing imaginary arguments in your head. That email notification sets off a spiral of stress you can't escape, and we wonder why real crises shatter us. We've rehearsed weakness in every small moment. We've built habits of fragility. Budō flips that script. The traffic jam isn't an interruption. It's training in patience. The frustrating coworker isn't a curse. They're your sensei in emotional control. That deadline isn't stress. It's practice for focus under fire. Suddenly, life itself is your dojo, and every difficulty is a lesson. This is why the samurai didn't fear death. They had rehearsed discipline in 10,000 daily moments. Death was just another test, no different than tying their belt or bowing before a teacher. Here's the dangerous truth. Most people never live this way. They separate practice from life. They think discipline is something you switch on when it's time to work out, or meditate, or study. But Budō demands no separation. There is no on or off. There is only the way. Every breath, every step, every word becomes training. That's why samurai could walk into chaos with serenity, because to them nothing was chaos. Everything was practice. And there's another layer. Budō teaches that challenges are not obstacles that block your life. They are your life. They are not interruptions on the way to peace. They are the way to peace. Think about how radically this changes perspective. When you're cut off in traffic, most people think, "Why is this ruining my day?" Budō says, "This is my training. This is what my discipline was built for." When you're exhausted and tempted to quit, Budō whispers, "This is the test you asked for." The Japanese had a proverb, "Fall down 7 times, get up 8. Everyone knows it. Almost nobody understands it. They think it's about resilience. But the math doesn't even make sense. How can you get up more times than you fall? The hidden meaning is this: the 8th time isn't after the fall, it's tomorrow morning. You get up before life pushes you down again. You rise before the battle even begins. That's Budō choosing to live in discipline before life forces it on you. But there's a catch. You can rehearse discipline inside safe walls forever. You can meditate in comfort, breathe deeply in yoga studios, or practice your art in carefully controlled environments. And you'll convince yourself you're strong. But when the real world hits, the unknown, the unpredictable, you'll find out if your Budō is real or just theory. The samurai knew this trap. That's why the next stage was necessary. They called it Musha Shugyō, the warrior's pilgrimage. Leaving everything behind, abandoning comfort, facing the raw world without protection. Only then could they prove that their training was real. And what happened on that pilgrimage? It broke most men, but for the few who endured, it transformed them into legends. Stage 3. Musha Shugyō, the warrior's pilgrimage. Shugyō makes you strong. Budō gives your strength direction. But the samurai knew there was still a danger lurking in both safety. Training in a dojo, even with the strictest rules, still gave you walls, rituals, and predictability. And predictability is a drug. It convinces you that you're prepared, even when you're not. That's why the samurai created the next stage, Musha Shugyō, the warrior's pilgrimage. It was the point where the safety net was cut away, and the world itself became your dojo. Musha Shugyō meant leaving everything behind, your home, your teacher, even your lord. Samurai, who took this path, abandoned their titles, their wealth, their families. They wandered Japan with nothing but their swords and their wits, seeking real tests. If their training was fake, the world would expose it. If it was real, the world would refine it. Miyamoto Musashi lived this philosophy to the extreme. At 15 years old, he left home and never returned. No comfort, no protection, no plan. For decades he wandered Japan, dueling any challenger. The world knows him for his 60 undefeated duels, but here's the detail most people miss. The duels weren't the true training. The suffering between duels was sleeping in caves, eating scraps, enduring freezing nights alone in the mountains, facing starvation and sickness without anyone to save him. Musashi didn't just win because he was skilled with a blade. He won because nothing life threw at him could break the mental fortress forged in pilgrimage. As he later wrote, "You must understand that there is more than one path to the top of the mountain. When you're comfortable, you see only one way forward, the easy, obvious way. But when you're desperate, starving, and stripped of safety, suddenly new paths reveal themselves." Musha Shugyō forces you into creativity, resilience, and adaptability. It proves whether your discipline is skin deep or written into your bones. Now compare that to the way we live today. Same house, same job, same people, same routines. We cling to predictability like it's oxygen. But really it's a cage. Our comfort zone becomes a padded cell, and we decorate it to distract ourselves from the truth. We've become prisoners who love their prison. That's why the smallest break in routine, a missed paycheck, a breakup, a move to a new city, feels catastrophic. We've rehearsed fragility in the safe box of our comfort zones, and when the world knocks, we crumble. But Musha Shugyō wasn't just a relic of the past. Some still choose this path today. Take Yuichiro Miura, a Japanese salaryman who spent decades repeating the same routine until he felt dead inside. At 70 years old, when most people are counting their retirement savings, he quit everything and set his sights on Everest. Not as a lifelong athlete, not with elite training, just a man who wanted to know if he was still alive. The mountain nearly killed him 5 times. He lost toes to frostbite. His body broke in ways doctors warned were irreversible, but he reached the summit. Yills, and when asked why, his answer was chilling. "I needed to know if I was still alive." That's Musha Shugyō in its purest form. It isn't about climbing Everest. It's about choosing challenges so far outside your safety net that they terrify you. Starting that business without guarantees. Moving to a new country without knowing anyone. Having the conversation you've avoided for years because it could shatter your relationships. The specifics don't matter. What matters is leaving. Stripping away comfort until only your raw self remains. And here's the brutal truth. Most who began the pilgrimage never returned. Not because they died, but because they discovered they were frauds. Their strength collapsed when the dojo walls disappeared. Their confidence was exposed as theater. Away from their teachers, their friends, their routines, they broke. Musha Shugyō was ruthless because it didn't lie. You couldn't fake toughness in the wilderness. You either lived your discipline or you discovered you had none. The Bushido code declared, "A samurai's word is his bond." But the deeper meaning wasn't about promises to others. It was about promises to yourself. When you say, "I will face this challenge," then retreat the moment it gets hard. You don't just break your word, you weaken the bond with yourself. And every broken bond makes you less trustworthy in your own eyes. That is the hidden cost of quitting. Musha Shugyō tested this bond without mercy. Alone on the road, far from familiar comfort, no one could save you but your own word. And if you betrayed that, the world would swallow you whole. But for those who endured, something profound happened. They returned not just tougher, but transformed. Not because of the battles they fought, but because they discovered something most humans never learn. They could trust themselves completely. They knew that even when the world stripped them bare, they wouldn't abandon themselves. That trust is the foundation of true mental toughness. Yet Musha Shugyō, as brutal as it was, wasn't the end. It was only preparation for the highest stage. Because surviving the pilgrimage didn't make you a master. It made you ready for the path of mastery itself. The Japanese called it Shuhari, the 3 stages of mastery. And this stage separated the good from the legendary, the disciplined from the transcendent. Stage 4, Shuhari. The 3 stages of mastery. Surviving the pilgrimage was never the final destination. The samurai knew that enduring hardship made you strong, but strength alone doesn't make you wise. After all, even a wild animal can endure hunger and cold. What separates a true master from a survivor is the transformation that comes next. This is where the Japanese concept of Shuhari enters, the 3 stages of mastery. Every great warrior, artist, or philosopher in Japan followed this pattern, not by choice, but by necessity. Shu, Hav, Ri. 3 simple syllables that describe the journey from student to innovator to someone who transcends both. Shu, protect or obey. This is where everyone begins, and it's also the stage most people hate. Shu means absolute imitation. No creativity, no improvisation, no personal style. You copy your teacher exactly. You trace their steps, repeat their words, mimic their methods until your ego disappears. The modern mind revolts against this. We want to be unique from the start. We want to add our spin and prove we're different. But the masters knew this urge is poison. You cannot break rules you haven't first mastered. You cannot transcend basics you don't own completely. Think about learning to write. As a child, you traced letters thousands of times. It was boring. It was mechanical. But without it, you'd never develop a signature of your own. Skip that stage, and your writing would always look like a child's scrawl. The same is true for toughness. In Shu, you submit to discipline without question. You wake when told. You practice the basics endlessly. You repeat until they become reflex. Most people quit here, not because it's physically hard, but because it bruises their ego. They don't want to admit they know nothing. They want to be masters without ever being students. Halve, break or detach. Only when the foundation is carved deep enough do you earn the right to question. Halve is the stage of innovation. You begin to understand why the rules exist, and with that understanding, you can bend them. This is where personal style emerges. The poet Matsuo Basho said, "Do not seek to follow in the footsteps of the wise. Seek what they sought." In Shu, you follow footsteps exactly. In Halve, you lift your eyes and realize those footsteps point towards something greater. You take your own path toward the same truth. Musashi lived this stage vividly. After mastering countless sword techniques, he broke free from the rigid forms. He created his own style. The Naito Nichiren, the school of 2 swords. It was a direct result of Halve respect the foundation, then adapt it to reality. That's why he was unbeatable. He didn't reject tradition. He transcended it by using it as fuel for innovation. Leave or transcend. This is the final and rarest stage. Is where technique disappears, where thinking ends and being begins. You no longer practice mental toughness. You are mental toughness. Musashi, in his final years, embodied this. He lived in a cave, far from society, writing the Book of 5 Rings. In it he wrote, "In strategy, it is important to see distant things as if they were close, and to take a distanced view of close things." At first it sounds cryptic, almost mystical, but what he's describing is perception beyond the ordinary. A mind that has left behind technique and now simply sees reality as it is. In Ri, the sword is no longer separate from the hand. The artist doesn't think about brushstrokes. His hand moves as if guided by something deeper. The carpenter doesn't deliberate over tools. His body itself is the craft, and the warrior doesn't choose courage. Courage flows naturally, like breathing. At this stage, toughness isn't about effort, it's about identity. You've become the teaching. The tragedy is that most never reach Ring. They stall at half, mistaking innovation for mastery. They think creativity is the peak, when in truth it's just the bridge. Ri requires decades. It requires disappearing into your practice so completely that there's nothing left to prove. No ego to protect, no battles to win. You simply embody the way. And here's the shocking part. You don't need to be a samurai to walk this path. Shuhari applies to everything. Learning music, building a business, even relationships. First you copy, then you adapt, then you transcend. True mental toughness comes not from dabbling, not from shortcuts, but from walking patiently through all 3 stages until the practice disappears, and only the essence remains. This is why true masters often seem supernatural. They aren't trying anymore. They aren't motivating themselves. They aren't forcing discipline. Their decades of Shu and Have built a riverbed so deep that now the river flows on its own. They move without hesitation, because hesitation no longer exists inside them. And this is the uncomfortable truth for modern people. We want shortcuts. We want 30-day challenges, quick hacks, morning routines that promise transformation in weeks. But mastery doesn't bend to our impatience. Shuhari takes years. It demands humility at the start, discipline in the middle, and surrender at the end. And yet, for those willing to walk it, the reward is a kind of strength that cannot be shaken. When you reach Ring, you stop chasing toughness. You stop asking how to stay disciplined. You stop searching for motivation. Toughness flows through you naturally. Whatever life demands, you meet it, not with panic, not with overthinking, but with calm presence. You've become the kind of person who no longer needs the system, because you've become the system. But here's the final paradox. Shuhari doesn't really end. Ri isn't a finish line, it's a circle. Once you transcend, you return to Shu with new eyes. The beginner's mind, perfected through mastery. The cycle begins again, each time deeper, each time clearer. This is the path that never ends. And that's why the samurai called it, not just training, not just philosophy, but the way. Because tomorrow's battle is already decided today, by whether you practice, by whether you step onto the path, by whether you begin your own Shuhan, your own Budō, your own pilgrimage, your own mastery. And that decision belongs to you alone. The final call to action. You've now seen the hidden system that transformed ordinary men into warriors who could face death without blinking. 4 stages. Shuhō, Budō, Musha Shugyō. Each one designed to strip away weakness and replace it with something stronger, something unshakable. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Knowing these stages means nothing. Samurai didn't read about Shuhō in books. They lived it under freezing waterfalls, bleeding in training halls, testing themselves against hunger and fear. Budō wasn't a philosophy they memorized. It was how they carried themselves, brushing their teeth, walking into rooms, speaking to strangers. Musha Shugyō wasn't an inspirational slogan. It was leaving home, never knowing if they would return. And Shuhō wasn't a TED talk about mastery. It was decades of repetition, humility, and transcendence that broke them open and rebuilt them into something beyond human. In other words, this system doesn't work if it stays in your head. It only works if it lives in your body, your actions, your choices, and the choice begins now. So here's the challenge. Choose your first Shuhō today, not tomorrow, not Monday, not when you feel ready. Today, what do you avoid? What makes you uncomfortable? That's your forge. If it's confrontation, speak the truth. You've been hiding. If it's discomfort, step into the cold shower instead of avoiding it. If it's silence, put your phone away and sit alone with your thoughts until they stop screaming. It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is the promise you make to yourself and whether you keep it, because that's the real test. Not the cold water, not the hunger, not the fear. The test is whether you keep your own word when nobody is watching. Every time you break it, you weaken the bond with yourself. Every time you keep it, you become stronger. That's the hidden law of the samurai, and it's the same law that governs your life today. Think about the battles waiting for you tomorrow. Stress at work, betrayals in relationships, the uncertainty of life itself. The outcome of those battles will not be decided tomorrow. They're already being decided today. In the small choices you make, do you reach for comfort, or do you train? Do you retreat, or do you rise? Do you save the promise for later, or do you keep it now? The monks under waterfalls weren't preparing for waterfalls. They were preparing for life. Musha didn't practice brush strokes for calligraphy competitions. He was preparing for war. And you aren't training for cold showers, long silences, or daily rituals. You're training for everything. Life will throw at you the betrayals, the failures, the heartbreaks, the losses, the moments that would shatter an untrained mind. Start now, and you become the kind of person who cannot be broken. Delay, and you'll remain trapped in the padded cage of comfort, safe, entertained, but fragile. That's the choice. And here's the brutal secret. Nobody will make it for you. No teacher, no guru, no system can walk the path on your behalf. The Japanese called it Shuhō, the path of forging the mind. And the path begins the instant you stop watching and start doing. The only question left is this: will you be the person who saves this video for later, or will you be the person who begins today? Because the samurai maxim still echoes across centuries. Tomorrow's battle is won during today's practice.